Welcome everybody who's online at the moment. We are just going to give people another minute or so to join in, and then we'll make a start. Okay, well, welcome everybody. It's great to have you here today. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Rita Yates, the CEO of Insurtech Australia and one of the co-founders. We have a mission at Insurtech Australia of building a world-leading insurtech and insurance innovation ecosystem here in Australia. Today's webinar is actually focused on crossing the ditch, so scaling insurtech successfully between Australia and New Zealand, and it's the first in a 4-part series which is sponsored by Austrade, where we're looking to help promote pathways for insurtech to scale outside of Australia as well as into Australia. Our next session is going to be focusing on the UK and scaling between Australia and the UK, which will hold in August. We know that scaling support for insurtech is so important because predominantly insurtechs build their businesses to go global from the beginning. As you know, this session is being run in partnership with our good friends at Insurtech New Zealand, and this is probably also a very good time to thank Austrade for their amazing support and sponsorship of this series, as well as the recent Insurtech Bootcamp, which was virtually run out of Tel Aviv and was a great success. Today, we are hoping to bring some insights, knowledge and resources around successful insurtech market penetration in Australia and New Zealand. To do so, we're going to start by hearing a little bit about the New Zealand insurance and insurtech landscapes, followed by the Australian landscape, and then we're going to hear from Austrade around what they do and some of the support services that they also offer. And then the rest of the session will be focused on 2 real-life case studies. Javln, which is a New Zealand insurtech scaled into Australia, and Open, an Australian insurtech that has scaled into New Zealand. And hopefully we'll hear lots of juicy learnings from both Jason and Dale. We will have Q&A if we have time, so please pop your questions into the Q&A section in the bottom panel of your Zoom. So now I'm going to hand over to Jason Roberts, the founder and chair of Insurtech New Zealand, and he is going to talk a little bit about the landscape in New Zealand. Thanks, Jason.
Kia ora koutou katoa, everyone. Lovely to have you all on board, and big shout out to Insurtech Australia for organising this event today, and obviously Rita and Joy and the team. So just brilliant to have you all here. Vanessa and I talked earlier on about how best we divide up the innovation conversations, noting the crossing the ditch between Australia and New Zealand. So I've agreed to talk about talent, data, a little bit about legislation and compliance, and the growth of insurtech in New Zealand. So within the few minutes that we've kind of got aside here, I'll give it a whirl. So there are some really important challenges for the tech sector. You know, one of them is actually with an insurance focus, being able to have the right staff and to promote insurtech as, or insurance industry largely, as quite a sexy place to be for insurance and technology teams or staff. And we know we're always competing against the tech sector. We've got other industries that we compete against. And so one of the challenges is to actually make insurance appealing and to foster folk who are interested in being in the insurance sector with a technology bent, because this is the empowering piece behind our own innovation and growth. So there's been quite a lot of happening there. It's been quite exciting watching Tower, and we'll hear more about them later, who have been really getting behind growing the sector. There's a few areas that we can do, and we're beginning to see here more of. For example, how can we get people more involved in the technology side of insurance? You can look at internships, talent sharing, companies who are much more proactive around getting out and sharing their problems and asking insurtechs or people with a tech bent to help solve those problems. And to then ultimately have an environment where there's attractive career pathways that companies offer. So it is an important challenge, and we know we want to do better. The education area has a role to play, whether that's tertiary sector or just actually getting people involved and thinking about insurance generally as they go through the technology environment. So all of that is a part of the tech scene and the insurance scene here that we need to think about. And it's great when we have folk who have an interest in technology and development, software development, data, all that sort of stuff coming through who are saying, I'm interested in insurance. So we definitely want to foster that more. Now I'll just click over to data a little bit more. Data is obviously a major driver of opportunity. We've always used data, of course, for risk analysis and so on, but it is a much more important place now against this backdrop of legislation, compliance, the ability or the desire from customers to see their own data and to know that it's being looked after safely and that it delivers a really personalised experience. And of course, what we're seeing now, and insurtechs are great at this, is the ability to find, capture, surface data in a way that provides better customer experience, a better customer journey, the ability to create and surface products. So, you know, what we're seeing here is definitely companies from the insurtech environment who are doing a really great job of finding that data and using that interpretation to really take it to the next level, and through that develop new products, new services, and you know, different risk profiles. Obviously, New Zealand is a, to use Jason, our other Jason on the call, a peril market, and there's some great stuff happening around macro data, geotech data that can help predict risk. This is both from a risk analysis of who we can insure and their rates and so on, but also turning that into a valuable proposition around how we can communicate back to our customers about what they can do to be best prepared and so on. So, you know, we're a country full of earthquakes and volcanoes, and so we've really got to think about that as one of the riskier countries in the world. The other side I'd like to talk about, though, is some of the issues also around customer data. So I mentioned legislation and compliance before. One of the great things that's coming through is that customer data platforms are really beginning to address some of these legacy data platforms and the ability to help marketeers with the third-party, first-party data environments that are really being caused, or sorry, not so much caused, but having to respond to market pressures around not having third-party cookies. So it is changing the way that insurers reach out to, and insurtechs can be a part of that reaching out to customers in a digital world and create those digital journeys as they go through a company and engage. It is the data that drives conversations, it's the data that drives products and services. And of course, behind that, the real problem is legacy data platforms and the role of not only CDPs, but also having a more open architecture are all a part of those back-end environments where data is certainly an important part of almost a next generation of insurers and insurance partnership. Okay, now in terms of legislation and compliance, we have a number of impacts coming through, and a lot of our legislation incidentally was put on hold during COVID-19. Much of that was in the financial services like yourselves, but and that was mostly impacting in what we call the financial advice sector under the FSLA legislation. But the more important part is the pressure on the insurers to you know, have better contract law, better acknowledgement of consumer rights and best interest, and through that the right sort of response around claims response, proportional response. All of those are actually a part of where insurtechs can play a role. And finally, the growth of insurtech. I won't spend too much on this. This is what the call is about today, but clearly we're really interested in helping made in New Zealand products for New Zealand and the world. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jason. We're going to hand over now to Vanessa Dobson, who is going to talk a little bit about the Australian insurance and insurtech market. Vanessa is one of the co-founders of Insurtech Australia also, and works in business engagement at Hollard. And you will notice she actually has a New Zealand accent, so it's very confusing. So I'll hand over to you now. Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you, Rita, and thank you, Jason. So in a nutshell, what are the insurance and insurtech landscapes like in Australia? So for a bit of context, the financial and insurance services represent about 9.5% of the gross value added in the Australian economy. So that's just as a bit of background here. And of course, similar to New Zealand, we can't have a serious conversation about insurance here without mentioning regulation. So there's been an enormous amount of change over the last couple of years, and that is ongoing. And while I'd say there is some debate over whether or not the regulation changes will deliver the better and more sustainable outcomes for customers, there is a broad agreement that the risk and compliance management is consuming a vast amount of resource. In addition to that, there is a focus on in-house systems and processes that require true transformation across the incumbent insurers. So with those two pretty hefty considerations as a backdrop, I guess one of the questions that we should consider is, do incumbent insurers still have an edge when it comes to access to data and capital, for example, over those newer insurtechs who are entering the market and seeking to disrupt how insurance is consumed? In my opinion, those insurers who not only fulfill the hefty regulatory change requirements and overhaul their in-house processes and keep an eye to the next horizon in terms of a strategic and customer view, I think those will likely come out ahead of their competitors. Which leads me to the insurtech industry itself, of course. We have seen significant growth over the last 3 years here in Australia. As at today, Insurtech Australia has about 75 insurtech members. There are a scattering of others, of course, as well, but those members are all operating in Australia and some operating globally. Currently, most insurtechs in Australia are focused on partnerships and capital. And over the last 2 years, particularly or predominantly in the B2B2C space. So they have been addressing pain points that incumbent insurers have had and are helping them to differentiate. Proportionally, more insurtechs are focused in the general insurance space than in life, and that seems to be a global trend, although local insurtechs do offer solutions right across the value chain. And likewise, as I think Rita mentioned earlier on, most Aussie insurtechs build their propositions in order to be able to scale internationally. We have also seen an increasing amount of interest from international insurtechs to scale here in Australia. The local ecosystem is apparently seen to be well connected. There's good infrastructure to support the insurtechs. And also we've been it's been great to have such good involvement from the incumbent insurers themselves. We have over 30 odd partners with Insurtech Australia, and many of them are incumbent insurers. And then generally, I would say that our ecosystem would welcome those international insurtechs looking to create jobs here and to scale. We see it as working to create an even more well-rounded ecosystem and fostering greater insurance innovation. All right, so let's jump to how I see Australia and New Zealand being similar and different. First of all, I have to mention the AA effect. And of course, what I mean by that is the Antipodean attitude. So Aussies and Kiwis understand the need to export. So we have long punched above our weight, respectively, on the global stage when it comes to innovative approaches in tech, medical sciences, sports and agriculture. There's no change here in the insurtech space. And I believe there is a tangible, we can do this attitude across both sides of the Tasman Sea. In terms of how we differ though, I think the investment maturity challenge is real. So it seems Australia may have a little bit of an advantage over New Zealand on this point. However, the struggle for VC commitment in particular is real and it's ongoing, and multiple insurtechs have sought funding offshore. And lastly, in terms of what resources are available in this market, well, Insurtech Australia acts like an industry body here, supporting growth and creating connections across the ecosystem, providing education in order to lift understanding, also accessibility to government programs and grants, as well as some advocacy on select topics. And of course, we have Austrade here today who will share with us in a moment about the type of support they provide. So in a nutshell, that's what the landscape looks like here in Australia.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. It's very hard to summarise it in 5 minutes, but I think both yourself and Jason have done a great job across the Australian and New Zealand landscapes. So, as you mentioned, we are now going to move to Annika Barton, who manages the landing pads for Austrade. Annika has been working really closely with us and how they can best support Insurtech that is looking to scale internationally. So I'm going to hand over to Annika now.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks, Jason and Vanessa. I will truncate what I was going to say a little bit, because I think a lot of the good points about the strong bilateral ties and the opportunity in both markets that you guys have covered really well. So I don't want to rehash the same ground again, but I will just, I guess, emphasize that I think the backdrop of the long and strong bilateral relationship that Australia and New Zealand have will only help for tech and insurtech traffic between the two markets. We know that Australia is New Zealand's biggest source of foreign investment, and Australia is also New Zealand's top investment destination. These pathways and this traffic creates really strong recognition in the market of each other's tech and each other's capabilities, and as Vanessa mentioned, each other's similarities, which goes a long way in this business. Australia is the largest export destination for the top 200 New Zealand tech exporting companies as well, and it's always served as an important stepping off point for globally expanding New Zealand companies and providing significant, although not, as Vanessa touched on, not kind of overly significant forms of investment, but it is a good place for companies to look for that international investment from outside of both jurisdictions. That feeling is reciprocated from Australia into New Zealand, and in the broader fintech space in particular, over half of the surveyed Australian fintechs are interested in expanding to New Zealand. We've seen firms like Blackbird and Australian VC launch a $28 million fund in New Zealand and an office in Auckland in 2019, and stating that through investment in their local presence, they hope to bring together the communities of Australia and New Zealand into a single group and help both become stronger together. Using our free trade agreement that's been around since 1983 as a foundation, both of our governments are working really hard to improve business opportunities by reinvigorating the Trans-Tasman single economic market discussions, and current initiatives include promoting digital trade, e-invoicing, and further streamlining the Trans-Tasman movement of people and goods, as we are now seeing a little bit more freedom in that respect as well. As we all know, COVID-19 has accelerated the adoption of digital technologies across industries, and digital trade flows now are more important than ever. Businesses in Australia and New Zealand must harness innovation to thrive in the global market space. And the Australian government intends for Australia to be a leading digital economy by 2030. To that end, as part of the economic recovery plan that Australia released late last year, the government announced an investment of $800 million to help Australian businesses boost their digital tech capabilities to grow productivity and create new jobs. I think I heard Vanessa mention jobs and growth earlier, so it's ingrained in our minds. Under that digital business plan, the Australian government has committed $9.6 million specifically to support fintech-related trade and investment flows. This means that Austrade, who is one of the co-leads for this program in charge of the $9.6 million, we are the federal government's trade and investment agency, and we have a focus on both supporting more Australian insurtechs to enter the New Zealand market and on assisting New Zealand insurtechs to tap into opportunities here in the Australian market. I think Vanessa spoke about, or Jason spoke about, some of the incumbents in New Zealand, but in the insurance industry as well, it's important to kind of reinforce that the business ties exist to this day and can be leveraged. Suncorp, for example, has networks and interconnected brands across Australia and New Zealand. We share those recognised insurance industry advocacy bodies like ANZIIF. And similarly, as demonstrated by today's webinar, we have those close ties between our leading Insurtech industry groups, Insurtech Australia and Insurtech New Zealand. I wanted to touch a little bit on what Austrade is doing with that $9.6 million, which we are calling the FinTech Trade and Investment Program. Broadly, we are working really hard in partnership with industry bodies like Insurtech Australia and FinTech Australia to understand where that support will get the most traction. We are trying to enhance the support that we provide to exporting companies and also to enhance, I guess, the recognition of and the attractiveness of Australia as a destination for foreign investment within the sector. We are engaging in sponsorship activities that will help us upskill and provide key insights for companies looking at new markets like New Zealand and like the UK webinar that's coming up in a couple of months. The program that we are running does have a top level focus on a few markets, the UK, Singapore and the USA, but Austrade has been working really closely with the industry bodies to understand what other markets should be a priority focus for our efforts and for these initiatives. And New Zealand has repeatedly come up as a market of interest for both flows into and out of within this space. So it's brought us to full circle to why we're here today. The kinds of support that Austrade provides are both on the trade side and the investment side. We often work really close in hand with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, who I perhaps will be on the call today. We have an office in Auckland, and our BDM, our senior BDM in that market, Philippa Hawken, is well connected in the ecosystem there and would be your first port of call, New Zealanders, if you were looking to speak to Austrade about coming to Australia. And in Australia, we have a team here that's focused solely on fintech. And when I say fintech, I do include Insurtech within that to help exporters access new markets. We provide insights into market opportunities, connections to regulators, which we know is quite often a hurdle in this industry. We can also provide introductions to potential customers, partners, and investors in both of those jurisdictions. So we're really looking to work closely with industry to ensure that support is pointed in the right direction, and look forward to hearing from the two companies today as to how they've managed that and how we might be able to support them going forward.
Thanks so much, Annika. That's great, and for all the support from yourself and Austrade as well. So we are going to get straight into the case studies now, which we've all been waiting to hear. So first up, I'm going to hand over to Dale Smith, the CEO of Javln. Dale is going to tell us a little bit about Javln, but also the scaling journey that they have had into the Australian market. Thanks, Dale.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks, everyone so far. It's great to have you all along, and welcome. Annika, I had no idea that you supported New Zealand businesses coming to Australia, so I've learned something today, and we'll certainly be in touch, that's for sure. So Dale Smith, as Rita said, I'm the founder and CEO of Javln, and Javln is a business I'm extremely passionate about. Hopefully you see that through the things we talk about today. Thanks, Joy. Next, who is Javln? So we sell software as a service to the insurance industry, being insurers, underwriting agencies, and brokers, and we help them manage their policies, their clients, specifically in relation to points made earlier, compliance, workflow, and including digital portals for online access, whether it's quote and bind and pay online, or an intermediated product where a client logs in and can have a look. So as I said, we're extremely passionate about new technology for the insurance industry. We're really proud of our business and the technology that we take to both of our markets today. We were founded in 2011, and we have a team of over 40 people across New Zealand and Australia currently, and that's growing at a rate that scares me, to be honest, but that's a separate topic. Thanks, Joy. I'll just go through some other key points about our business, just to give you a bit of bit more context. So we see ourselves as a leading New Zealand software as a service vendor focused on insurance. We assist insurance businesses and the industry to embrace modern and effective technologies, effective being the operative word in that statement. We regularly onboard SME and enterprise customers across New Zealand, Australia, the Pacific, and also we have clients in Guam, of all places, who are very supportive of us. We've recently been appointed the preferred technology partner for the New Zealand Underwriting Agency Council, and for many years we've worked closely and been a member of the Underwriting Agency Council of Australia. I'm actually a co-chair of Insurtech NZ with Jason and Blair Turnbull from Tower. So I have a vested interest, something I'm passionate about, is growing Insurtech in New Zealand. Javln was one of the first AWS technology partners to list in the AWS global marketplace. That's also something we're really proud of. And last year we were recognised as a finalist in the Emerging High Tech Company Awards for 2020, which is also a great thing for us. Thanks, Joy. So scaling it where the rubber hits the road, this is what it's all about, scaling to Australia. So there are many New Zealand government support channels. New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, I think there's a couple on the call today, Kia, California Innovation through various different programs, scale-up programs, all focused on international growth. From a practical perspective, I want to try and give as many practical examples as we go through because I think they're really meaningful. So our very best experience from a New Zealand government channel perspective is the Kia network. So Kia is a network of, Kia stands for Kiwi Expats Abroad. And there's so many supportive Kiwis around the world that are, for the most part, very happy to help New Zealand businesses. It's not just technology, but any business with export income. And Kia is extremely good at making these connections, and I cannot speak highly enough of the team at Kia and what they've done for Javln. An example is we had been doing some research into the UK market as a geography that we look to beyond Australia. And through a connection at Kia, we were connected with a group of expats that we could talk to, one of which was Mark Wilson, this ex-CEO of Aviva Global, with $46 billion worth of revenue. He spoke to me for over an hour, really interested in what we're doing, having ongoing contact with him, and he's very supportive of New Zealand and what Javln's doing and other New Zealand businesses. This is just one example of, something practically that's had a massive effect on our business. So reach out to Kia, they'll do an amazing job of connecting you with a great network. So why Australia? Vanessa's obviously picked up on a lot of this stuff, but which we agree with. We've got extremely strong economic ties. In New Zealand, most of the large insurance companies in New Zealand, and as a result, the products that are sold in country are controlled from Australia, ultimately. So there's a general understanding of Australia from New Zealand. Obviously, we've got extremely close proximity. Travel there used to be a lot easier than it is today, but I'm sure we'll get back to that being the case again. Although COVID has forced everyone, as was mentioned before, to embrace digital and online meetings, and we can say that we've effectively onboarded customers in Australia without meeting face to face and done it all online and digitally. And I think that really is the way of the future in terms of scaling. So the journey so far, it has been a journey, but there's lots of great stuff that's happened, but not all of it's hard. Some of it's a little bit easier than you first imagine. So we commenced our our journey into Australia in 2018. I went back through my diary to figure out how many times I went to Australia in the 2 years leading up to COVID. So I had 30 trips in 2 years to Australia, which actually doesn't sound too many. One of the things we did when we went into Australia is we had a clear target market of customers we were chasing. So, which is effectively intermediated businesses, underwriting agencies and brokers. So many meetings, lots of multiple meetings, discussions, lead follow-ups, building trust is a big one. Although we are joined at the hip, Australia and New Zealand, from an economic perspective, we are still different geographies, and you do need to build trust, that's for sure. And I can honestly say, after 3 years and one global pandemic thrown in for a bit of good measure, we're getting some fantastic momentum in the Australian market, which is fantastic. Thanks, Joy. So what works well? And these are some of the, I mean, there's a lot that's gone okay, but these are sort of some of the top points that I've felt have been really beneficial for our business and how we've moved into Australia. Insurtech Australia is extremely supportive of its members, and I cannot recommend Insurance Australia enough in terms of what they do. If you're not a member, I would suggest you become a member as soon as possible if you're considering a move into the Australian market. The ecosystem, the founder connection, the genuine desire to assist and support both startups and more established technology businesses like ours is a credit to everyone involved in Insurtech Australia. And I think this is something that we are actively trying to replicate in New Zealand, and hopefully we'll continue our relationship of working strongly together. At a practical level, we've found that in Australia there's several publications, be it Insurance News or Insurance Business News, that do, or NEBA as an example, as a trade group, that do really good EDMs that you can hook into an EDM campaign run by them, and it doesn't cost too much, but it's actually really effective. We'll generally get a handful of really great leads out of one EDM, and that's a really good payback. Trade events, obviously pre-COVID, I'm talking about, were a really great way of making connections and collecting market intel, and again, that not that expensive, but really well attended, I think, in terms of audience. What are some of the challenges? So there are lots of challenges, but travel is obviously a challenge. 30 trips in a couple of years. There is a need when you move into Australia to get market validation or product market fit. As I mentioned before, it is a different geography with different compliance standards, different legislation. One of the practical examples of that from a software perspective is how stamp duty is managed. So we don't have stamp duty in New Zealand, there's stamp duty in Australia, albeit not in all states and of different levels. It is a technical quandary to get through. That's just one example. Getting momentum takes some time and constant effort. It's sort of not the thing you can take your eye off. You've got to keep the momentum going. From a challenge perspective, our belief is the insurance industry has historically been very underserviced from incumbent technology vendors. So moving to modern technology like Javln or Open is a fundamental change for an insurance business. Therefore, sales cycles can take a little bit longer than you would like, but through constant focus and the appropriate level of resources, you will get there. Industry incumbents, or when I say that, I mean technology vendors, not insurance companies, but industry incumbent technology vendors are really holding the industry back in Australia. That is a challenge. It's not just a challenge for us, it's a challenge for insurtechs in Australia and other New Zealand insurtechs going into a geography like Australia. When I mean platforms, I mean things like Sunrise, for example. Getting market validation can take some time. So that is a challenge. And at a more practical level, getting a bank account set up in Australia can take a very long time. So if you're gonna do it, start setting your bank account up before you think about going, because it's quite a rigmarole. And obviously there's a requirement for local directors and those sorts of things. So where to next? So for Javln, we're going to continue to push hard into the Australian market. We're going to keep using the tools that work, EDMs, trade shows, word of mouth. We're going to keep growing our New Zealand and Australian team, and as a result, our export revenue. And subsequent to that, we're going to look at other geographies like the UK and Singapore. So in summary, Australia is a great market to embrace, and there's fantastic New Zealand government support channels, and having learnt today, Australian government support channels for New Zealand insurtechs. If you're going to sell into an Australia as an insurtech, connect with Insurtech Australia. Our experience has been fantastic. You will need perseverance and commitment. The insurance industry needs great new tech. So embrace the opportunity. It's real and it's right now. So embrace it and get stuck into it. Start small, but grow as you can and focus on a clear group of customers that you're solving real problems for. And it's not as hard as you think at the beginning. Just some momentum, commitment, the appropriate level of resources, and Australia will be a great market for you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dale. So much in there. I've actually got lots of questions. If anybody else has questions for later on, and hopefully we will have time, just post them in the Q&A and we'll come back to them later. Thank you for talking up Insurtech Australia. We didn't pay Dale to talk us up. I'll just put that out there. But thank you for doing so anyway. Before we move on, I'll quickly pick up on a couple of things that Dale mentioned. One was around publications like Insurance News. And I thought I'd mention that Insurance News every Monday now has a dedicated Insurtech section where they are looking to focus on stories that are coming out of the Insurtech startup and scale up landscape here, which is really great and positive. And there's certainly interest in reading about that. And the second piece was around the trade shows, which obviously have been on hold for such a period of time. We, in fact, couldn't run our two-day conference with ANZIF in February this year because of COVID and the previous lockdowns that had happened in Sydney, but we are looking to schedule a form of conference in November later this year to get the community back together again and get some of those opportunities rolling. So we'll share more about that as the time gets closer. But now I'm going to hand over to Jason Wilby, who is the co-CEO and co-founder of Open, as well as Huddle. And I'm going to get him to tell you a little bit about the Open business and some of the experiences that they've had moving into the New Zealand market. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thank you very much. Kia ora koutou. Hello, everybody. I'm Jason. I'm one of the co-founders. So Jonathan Buck is based in Australia, and myself and a few of our team members have been based here in New Zealand for some time. And we're pretty excited to be here today to share some insights. A quick disclaimer, we are very new into New Zealand. We're just starting to get into New Zealand. So I think we can share a few insights today, but I think if we asked us in probably a few weeks, months, maybe years time, we'll have a lot more things to share as well as we learn more about getting into our first overseas market. So I guess what we're going to do today is I'm just going to quickly run through a little bit about our business just to sort of help frame some of the challenges and some of the things we focus on. And as I said, share a few insights and learnings from us and hopefully leave enough time so we can get a few questions as well going towards the end of our time. So just really quickly, just to help folks understand, I guess, our business and our business model, we are a platform business. We issue policies and manage them on behalf of underwriting partners. So we are, we're a platform a bit like Stripe, but we actually handle all, or a technology business, but we actually handle all of the money, the flow of funds. We collect premiums on behalf of our insurance underwriting partners. We pay them out as claims, and we help ensure that policies are managed appropriately end to end as well. We have a long-standing underwriting partner in Australia, which is Hollard, very kind of key part of our, they're a cornerstone investor and very kind of key partner in our growth. And then just recently we announced Tower yesterday, which we're really excited about as our second underwriting partner for our second market as well. The reason for just sort of framing up our model, so we, as I said, we issue policies on behalf of underwriters. We focus on home insurance, car insurance. We also have travel. Remember those days when there was travel insurance? But we'll get back into travel again once that market, once the travel sort of normalizes, and we'll probably start doing some things in the SME space as well over the coming year. So all of that, because we're a policy issuer, we manage policies. We effectively manage those policies from quote to claim. So our core innovation is all about using data and connectivity to drive customer experience and price improvements in a nutshell. Our business model is to embed our products in existing customer workflows and use data to personalize them. In Australia, we offer car and home insurance within the Telstra digital experience. We do that with utility companies. We do that also within pricing platforms like Compare the Market and a whole bunch of other contexts. Once we've got those policies, once customers have those policies, they can then connect those policies to third-party data sources and keep them current. So we've got workflows and APIs that make it possible for our customers or even third-party developers to update policies on a customer's behalf. Perhaps they've just bought a new item that can be added programmatically onto a home contents policy. And just lastly, we also handle claims. So in Australia, claims processing is now a financial service. So another regulatory, challenge for us. But we also process claims on behalf of our underwriting partners. And so we have to deal with both claim payments, assessments, and also everything from dispute resolution, IDR and EDR as well. And today we have about customers' clear preference. About 60% of all claims are managed online, submitted and managed online, and about half of our claim by volume are approved or approvable instantly. And so our focus is every week, every month, our engineering team and product teams are launching new features to drive up the digitalization throughout the customer lifecycle, improving quality and reliability, and also being able to turn that into pricing advantages as well. So because we are, I guess, this sort of full stack and you're handling and providing a lot of financial services for us, and we're not the only ones that do this, but I think it creates a range of different challenges. Probably the biggest one being regulated is regulators. So for us, we have a significant focus on both how we engage with regulators in new markets, but also zooming out. We are right now working through how do we develop regulatory and regulatory affairs frameworks that enable us to scale into new markets and build capability quickly to understand regulation and be able to respond to regulatory requirements in different markets. I think as Dale said earlier, product localization, I was great to hear you talk about stamp duty. Something we love talking about, and it's quite complicated in Australia. You've also got things like state-based taxes and a lot of things in the back office that we have to focus on getting right, either for a local state level or of course at a country level as well. The other thing we have to do is focus on products themselves. So in Australia, our car insurance has an option called Kanga cover, and it's an excess-free collision with an animal option, which is popular in Australia because unfortunately that's a popular reason for a claim, also a common reason for a claim. I don't think we're going to sell much of that in New Zealand. So for us to go into new markets, not only are we looking at the back office and how we ensure that we're able to operate compliantly, but also and also deal with things like taxes and different regs. We also actually got to go back to basics and look at the products themselves and the core constructs and ensure that those are responding to genuine needs in that market. Thirdly, partners. We wouldn't be able to do anything without underwriters. And a key kind of partner for us has been Hollard over the last 5 years, and we're really excited about the work we're going to do with Tower now in New Zealand as well. Distribution partners as well. There are differences across markets, and I think just picking up on a couple of themes that have been discussed already. There are lots of networks out there, whether it's Austrade or Insurtech or fintech groups. There are lots of opportunities and existing networks to be able to develop partnerships. They, in our experience, they take time, quite rightly, and I think it's often that a market entry is really enabled by partnerships. I think everything else is largely solvable. And the last piece of the puzzle is being able to tap into support services. And I'm glad you brought up banking, Dale, because I will confirm it's equally, if not possibly, harder getting a bank account in New Zealand as an Australian company as perhaps being a New Zealand-based company and getting a bank account in Australia. I think there's a lot of neobanks in consumer land. Speaking of opportunities, there's some pretty good opportunities to simplify business banking as well. Perhaps Judo and some of the others will nail that. So that's a little bit about our overall sort of landscape. Just very quickly, some of the things that we've learned, and I just thought would be worthwhile calling out today. In our view, as a tech business, and I think others have sort of touched on this earlier, most Australian and New Zealand businesses always start out with a global mindset because it's necessary. I think I look back at across the years and the amount of sort of time our product and engineers have spent sparring and debating whether or not to do something the quick way or or develop a data model and take the time to do something so it's scalable. We've never regretted taking the scalable option. It sometimes feels hard and feels annoying to sort of slow down something. But I think if you've got your tech sorted out and your core models designed in such a way that they'll enable internationalization, then you can go out and focus on the real challenges of market entry, which is all about, in our view, about partnerships and talent. Partnerships for us, just talking about underwriters, for those that would be looking at underwriter partnerships. We spent a very long time back in 2014, 2015, getting to know Hollard. And I often sort of describe it as like a dating process. We were getting to know Hollard. We talked to some of the bigger listed insurers in Australia. We spent a very long time trying to work out who would be the right underwriter for us to work with. We didn't rush that process. We've never looked back and we thought that we spent too much time doing that. I think that's just on the right-hand side, being flexible around timeframes. There are some partnerships that are worth getting right. And underwriting partnerships is a bit like getting married. It's quite easy to get into a relationship with an underwriter, I think, relatively. I think the most important thing is finding the right underwriter, the strongest partner for that market, someone who shares crystal clear, I guess, shares the vision and for what it is you're trying to execute and the problem you're trying to solve for customers. Because insurance is complicated. There'll be little speed bumps, and you want to be really, really, really aligned on that long-term goal and vision. And so I would often say, spend time getting to know underwriters and think of it as like getting married. I just want to quickly touch on, just kind of leave some time for questions as well. One of the things we've learned is the value of good advisors. And I think when people have said this to us before, we may have been a bit dismissive of it, like, oh, sure, you can hire lawyers or you can find different people to do different things. One of the things that we've learned in particular over the last year is the value of knowing when to use sort of top tier and big firms, and these kind of incredibly sort of like powerful big firms with lots of smart people versus boutiques. And we've really experienced firsthand with the reg change in Australia, a lot of value actually, quite a few instances where we are engaging with larger firms and we think that big is always good. And in actual fact, it is quite often when you need a complex piece of like written advice and you really want to be able to rely upon it for something. But it's also worth acknowledging that often the boutique firms are dealing with a common recurring industry problem and are able to tap into experience and a market practice very, very, very quickly. So one of the things I would share with people, and I'm happy to, if people want to reach out, there are a few very good boutiques that we've worked with across Australia and in New Zealand as well. And I'm sure Insurtech Australia and Insurtech New Zealand would also be a good referrer. But finding good advisors quickly that can help you solve problems quickly so you can move on is enormously valuable. And lastly, I'm just going to come back to that flexibility point. If, you know, in our view, the focus is always on partnerships. Just for our business model, channels and underwriters are key. Allow things to have a bit more time and to get things right. And in our view, we're really driven, and we're already in market development across Europe and a bunch of other markets as well. There's always unexpected things, both road bumps and opportunities. And I'm going to just a quick sort of call out for Austrade. We met with Austrade. We've met with them, I think, in the past, and we re-engaged recently. And there is, as Dale was describing, there's a value there that we might have missed. Introductions that they're providing that are sort of changing and shaping the way that we're approaching some of our market entry conversations. So it's good to be ambitious and to be driving sort of a particular sort of time frame. It's also really good to leave enough time to kind of be opportunistic as well and react to some things that you might not have expected. I'm going to pause there so there's enough time for questions, but I hope that was useful, and I'm very happy to, if you want to reach out, to talk about some of our experiences as well.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jason. I think you covered a lot of ground there, and a lot of it was actually around the connection piece and making sure that you have the right people around you and connected with the right people, or can help you be connected with the right people. A couple of questions probably for both yourself and Dale. Regulation's been mentioned quite a few times, and in our space of insurance, it's always, you know, very much at the top of conversation. So entering a new market can be quite daunting, I would assume, in terms of the different regulatory frameworks. Was there an approach that either of you or both of you took to really understand those frameworks before actually entering the market, and what you needed to consider from a regulation perspective? Or was there something or someone or an organisation or whatever it was that particularly helped in that process?
I'm happy to share some fresh experience. I think, in terms of an approach, I think, in reality, I think like many insurtechs and fintechs, we've gone from being a very small team in 2016 of 5 to 10 people to 50 people and millions of dollars of GDP each month. Risk appetite changes as you go through that evolution. And I think when we started in 2015, it was a different reg environment, and we were quite, we were by definition tiny, so our risk appetite was sort of more different. I think going through it a second time round 5 years later, our risk appetite is way different, and so we are driven to really understand things much more thoroughly than perhaps perhaps we might have done in some of the earlier days. I think, and that's culturally, so it's not just like, let's understand this and have a document up here. Like, we're trying to ensure that the whole company understands the different regimes, and that takes time and takes investment. I think the challenge that we have to acknowledge is that both in Australia and New Zealand, it is a moving target, and we've got reg reform playing out through Australia. That's it will be different next month to what it is this month. The requirements will be different again in another quarter, and so that adds complexity if you're just getting going, and it's complex if you are in market, because you've got to apply, as I think Jason called out earlier, you've got to dedicate resources to keeping up with reg change and the different compliance requirements. In New Zealand, we've got new regs and a new regime, and actually it's really interesting because not everybody has a completely the same view on what is advice and what is not advice. And so that's where we are. Whenever there's change in the regulatory space, there's always an element of grey. And I think our approach is to try and be fit for scale and find the right advice to be able to help us work through those issues.
From our perspective, Rita, we've relied heavily on the relationship that our customers have with their compliance experts. So as brokers and agencies and anyone collecting money need, there's an audit requirement. And so we rely and have relied heavily on those relationships. That said, there are organisations in Australia that have have the experience that we've been engaged with, that can offer an independent view to people like us, as opposed to that relationship held at a customer level. And all of those discussions from a product perspective have been really valuable, really valuable.
Rita, I might just jump in, I think, and expand on something that Dale, I think you touched on earlier when you were talking about leveraging the diaspora a little bit, but within highly regulated industries like Insurtech, I mean, I think one important option that people should consider or put on the table or keep on the table is partnering into market, right? So that local partner can have either navigated the ecosystem before or have the required licenses or be able to tell you how to get them yourself. That can really ease that entry model. And I mean, often when we're working with companies, not just between Australia and New Zealand, but globally, you know, the question we're asking is, what's the tipping point that makes it viable for you to get registered as a business in your own right? Or should you be looking to partner or acquire, or you know, where's that tipping point for you? And we can kind of help you navigate that. But I think it's important to consider that within a regulated industry, your route to market might change based on the regulations in that jurisdiction.
Absolutely. I want to pick up on one thing that Dale said as well. I think because there's always regs, even whether you're regulated or not. As you say, you've got to get your head around them. Dale mentioned persistence earlier as well, and I think if you're new to Insurtech or fintech, and they're all solvable problems, but your persistence is required, I think, to kind of keep going and work through the many regs and issues that arise there.
Actually, I might just add to that, Jason. In New Zealand, we've recently had a role introduced by the Financial Markets Authority, Benny Paul, for some who know him, who are the interface for fintechs to the Markets Authority. And it's quite an exciting situation where you have people who have an understanding of both the fintech environment and the regulatory environment. And whilst it's not major for insurance, just for other areas of banking and so on, but it's certainly an opportunity for Insurtechs to start the process early and to get the relationships going with the regulators.
Yeah, some really great points there, I think, to finish up on as well, as we do have only a couple of minutes left. To finish up, I guess, first and foremost, we were just going to touch on the fact that we do have a bunch of events coming up. And I think Joy might pop up just a slide, perhaps the event slide just before that one. Yep, that's the one. Covering a whole range of topics relevant to our space. On the 8th of June, we're focusing on cyber insurance in partnership with the City of London. We are then looking at AFSLs, which is a member-only event, but it's something that has been raised in today's discussion. Who needs them? The future of home we'll be looking at with RAA on the 22nd of June, and that obviously is specifically around insurance and the way that we in the future could potentially be using our homes. 23rd of June is the launch of our Playbook event series around partnership between Insurtech and incumbents, together with EY, which is for members and partners. The first one in that session is creating an innovation plan. And then 13th of July, we're partnering with RAC to have another session with Better Labs Ventures, who is an investor into startups in Australia and overseas and have made 15 investments so far in the last 12 months. So with that said, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to Austrade and Annika, to Jason and Vanessa, and to Jason and Dale as well from Open and Javln. We have some contact details on the screen. We'd love you to get in touch with any of our organisations, and we'll also send through the contact information to everyone that's registered today, as well as the info from the contact info for Open and Javln businesses. As I said, hopefully we'll see you at an upcoming event as well. Our next event in this particular series will be the first week in August, and we'll focus on the UK market and scaling into the UK market, as well as UK companies scaling into Australia. And that's pretty much it for now. So thanks for joining us again. Stay well, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks all.